Hi, I'm Jarrett Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. On today's episode, I am joined by the graphic designer and educator Nicole Killian. Nicole is currently the co-director of the Design Visual Communications MFA at Virginia Commonwealth University, where they are also an assistant professor in the graphic design department. Nicole's work uses graphic design, video, publishing, objects, and installations to investigate how structures of the internet, mobile messaging, and shared online platforms affect contemporary interaction and shape cultural identity from a queer perspective. They recently guest edited a series for the Walker Art Center called How Will We Queer Design Education Without Compromise? We begin this conversation, however, with their early education. Nicole studied graphic design at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where they did a study abroad at the Bauhaus, making them, I think, my first guest to actually have studied at the Bauhaus. So we talk about that. We talk about that experience and how that kind of shaped their early education, as well as their time studying at Cranbrook. We also, of course, talk about these ideas of queering design education and what that actually looks like in practice. If you like the show, I hope you consider supporting it on Patreon. We offer 3 monthly tiers, $3 for students, $5 for patrons, and $10 for superfans. They give you access to all sorts of bonus content like a monthly newsletter, early episode transcripts, exclusive interviews, and more, all while helping to financially support this show. So if you like Scratching the Surface, if you would like to see it continue, I hope you consider joining us on Patreon. You can visit patreon.com/surfacepodcast for all the details and to help support the show. Thanks for listening, and here's my conversation with Nicole Killian. I'd actually like to begin talking a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into all of this, and I'm very curious about the trajectory of your career. You grew up in Rochester, right? And then you went to RIT for undergrad?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo,
actually.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I get all of upstate New York. It's just one. I lived in the city for a while, so everything else is just New York.
I feel like anyone who's never left or like who's lived in New York City thinks everything upstate is like Hudson, but
Yeah. I know more than that. I know more than that.
No, I know. I'm joking. But yeah, Buffalo's about an hour away from Rochester.
Can you talk about what you were interested in at the time when you were going to RIT? What was your sort of understanding of graphic design, or why did you start to kind of go in that direction?
I mean, I think that it's not very different from a lot of people that went to high school in the 90s, but I really liked being on the internet, and I liked magazines and album covers. And I would say I didn't really understand much of what graphic design was, but I knew that I liked art and I liked sitting at a computer, which maybe I would have like told my high school self to think about that deeper. But yeah, that was sort of, I wanted to go to school for art. And I was a first generation college goer, and so I think graphic design seemed really like my parents could get behind that and be excited for me when I said, I think this is what I'm going to do.
This is a weird question. I'm sorry, but what kind of work were you doing in school? What were the projects like? Was it aligning with your expectations? Did it meet what you wanted as being like an art kid who liked being on the computer?
I had no expectations. I went to Catholic school, and my art education wasn't that great. And so when I got to school, I was like pretty intimidated because I remember there were kids who had already used a Mac, and I was like, oh no, this is not going to go well for me. I think even when I had applied to schools, some programs told me I was going to have to go into remedial drawing classes, or else I was not going to be a good graphic designer, which is wild. So I had no expectations, and it was really great. I loved art foundations. I loved sort of taking things that, weren't directly connected to what I was going to be studying in graphic design. I would say, at RIT, the American modernism really cast a strong glow over everything. And sort of looking at that curriculum even now, it seems like it does. I think we really stopped at April Greiman when it came to contemporary
Ah,
conversations, and we didn't really learn much about postmodernism. Um,
oh, interesting.
but I connected with faculty who let me explore their prompts in different ways. They were the type of faculty who talked about graphic design without talking about graphic design, where we would just watch a shit ton of music videos in class, or like pour over a stack of books, or go to the Dollar Theater after class. And that felt like the education.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, the teachers that I gravitated towards, you know, if we were doing sort of like a sequential photo project, they let me not mount it on foam core. They let me put the photos in a box with a bunch of
Mm.
trinkets, and so it became this silly experiential thing. And I'm really grateful for those people: Heinz Klinken, Lori Freer, Ryan Clifford. Um, they were people who really, I think, yeah, supported a student's want for maybe more than what was being provided.
And that's kind of why I was asking, and I don't they do have that sort of modernist brand, that's kind of what they're known for.
Elliot Earls also went there.
I do know that, yeah, which is also I think I asked him about this question too.
Yeah, yeah, which I think was something that we initially connected on when I went to grad school. But yeah, I mean, I think that I took a really amazing class with Roger Remington that was called,
Mm,
like,
mhm.
Women Pioneers in Design, and, we would, like, get on the phone with people. He would just sort of call his friends, and we would talk to them. And the archives were incredible. And something that Roger did that I think was really brilliant, there were no tests, and I think everything else was really sort of focused around, what are you remembering? And you
Mhm.
know, everyone has to take a test to make sure you know design history. But he really, we'd read stuff, we'd experience the archives he'd bring in, and then we'd talk about them and write reflective pieces. And I thought that was really refreshing, given sort of what else was going on at RIT at the time.
It's interesting that you were kind of challenging the prompts too at that time, and, I think about my own undergraduate experience, which was also a very kind of modernist focused, uh education, and sort of, those were the aesthetics that everything was judged against. And I just totally bought into it. I loved tell me how to set up a grid and how to follow these rules and I will do it. I did it. It came later for me to think about how to challenge those things. And
Mhm.
so why where do you think that came from for you, that you were kind of immediately saying, well, why does it have to be on foam core? Why can't it be in a box with trinkets?
Um, I don't. I actually don't know. I don't think I was really thinking deeply about it. I just knew that I wanted to try something. And I think also Graham Carson, who was my 3D foundations teacher, I just like shouting out people
Yeah,
that
go for it.
are,
Go for it.
are important, because I think, Graham was Graham is a drooler and taught 3D foundations. But I think, like, also gravitating towards people who weren't in graphic design, I
Mm,
think really allowed me to just think about object making and form and, like, communication in maybe these other ways. And that maybe that was where that questioning came from. But
right.
I don't know, I think I was in school 2000 to 2004, and I feel like I was
Mm,
just really curious about stuff I was seeing in books, or the things I was being inspired by in films. And so I thought, well, why not try it a different way? Like, if we're here and we're supposed to be trying things out, like, why not do that? Which, yeah, there was no other sort of like deep question
yeah.
I was having.
You then went to the Bauhaus. How did that happen? And why did that happen? This is
You
the most
know,
curious part of your background that I'm trying to figure out.
well, it's the reason I went to RIT is that they had to study abroad.
Ah,
And the only one they had was surprise, surprise at the
wow, of
Bauhaus.
course.
Um, I don't I went to an open house. I saw uh, a senior talk about their experience, and that seemed really life-changing for them, and I don't know why, but I felt like I was like, "Whoa, that I wanna do that."
Mm,
And so I was minoring in Italian at RIT and then found out I was going to go to Germany and decided to audit a German class. I was like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna go to Germany in the next semester." So yeah, that was the only option, and I just wanted to have that experience. And so the trade-off was like I either graduate with my friends in Rochester or I get into this study abroad. And so it was me, an industrial design student, one other graphic designer, and a new media student, and the four of
mhm.
us went over. Our classes were
Wow.
all in German. Um, and kind students afterwards would help us translate what happened in class. And it was incredible. It was a totally humbling experience to like have to figure things out in a different way, and not have the privilege of just
Yeah,
knowing what's going on
yeah.
and like thinking about that deeply as a designer.
I have 2 questions that are kind of
Yeah.
related. One is just tell me more about that experience. Tell me what it
Yeah.
was like to be at the Bauhaus, but I'm also curious, were you how much were you aware of sort of the mythos about the Bauhaus and
Oh.
the legacy and the sort of importance that designers put on this institution? Were you aware of that
Oh,
going in?
yes. I mean,
Okay.
I was, and I think I teared up when I first saw.
Oh.
I mean, it was,
Oh,
yeah, I
wow.
mean, like, tiny Nicole at 21 was totally like, "I can't believe I'm here," you know?
Yeah.
And the German students, I mean, it was hilarious. The German students were like, "Whatever, like, who cares about the Bauhaus?" And that was really great too because I think it really made me think about our education at RIT and why
Ah,
were we sort of like obsessing over this thing that maybe like yes it's important but there's probably all these other things that I haven't learned.
right.
And so that was like a funny thing getting there, and then the students, not the German students, sort of not being as sort of they weren't swooning over where they were going to school,
Mhm.
for sure. uh it was great. When I got there, I realized that my hand had been held extremely tight,
Mm.
in my undergraduate education, and then all of a sudden I was there. I was getting prompts, and 10 weeks later, you'd show up with your project. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember meeting weekly with one of my professors, and he said something like, "Slow down, like, this isn't America, I'm not checking off boxes." Uh, and I just, there was a lot more autonomy, and I think that it seemed like at least the classes that I was taking, the professors really believed in the autonomy of the students, and so there
Mhm.
weren't all these sort of like, next week you need this, and the week after that you're going to present this, and you have to do this. It really was, this is the overarching idea. um, Now go explore it and we'll come back and see what you've all done. And I think that that was really shocking to me. I didn't know how to slow down. It was really confusing. And then sort of, when I was done, I realized how grateful I was for that experience, and it left me wondering how to do that again.
I promise this whole conversation will not be about the Bauhaus, but somehow out
I
of
hilariously never get asked about it.
Oh, great.
So it is sort of funny that you're like, "Tell me more about the Bauhaus," because I don't, I sort of forget forget that that happened.
Well, I have a couple questions that will hopefully kind of make this obsession makes a little bit more sense. I mean, somehow out of the 212 people that I've talked to, I've not talked to anyone else who has graduated from the Bauhaus. So you are the first, which is why I'm asking you all of these questions.
Yeah.
But the two other reasons why I'm asking is because I'm endlessly fascinated by the Bauhaus, largely because I have come to learn that the Bauhaus, what I was taught about the Bauhaus when I was an undergrad, like my undergrad design history class, is
Mhm.
such a sort of oversimplified understanding
Mhm.
of what they were trying to do. And it was like,
Mhm.
circle, square, triangle, red, blue, yellow, modernism, Van der Rohe, and all of this sort
Mhm.
of socialist utopian student led, it's a very the origins of the Bauhaus are very radical, and all of that was completely sanitized in how I was kind of
Mhm.
taught. And I've tried to do this sort of like re-education of the Bauhaus, and I find it kind of fascinating what they were trying to do, and then how that shifted and became what we know of the Bauhaus. And I sometimes think, sorry, I'm ranting now a bit,
No, you're
but
fine.
this like these modernist ideals plus sort of foundation courses seems to be what everyone has taken away from the Bauhaus, and those are maybe the two least interesting things, to kind of take
Yeah.
from that legacy. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious about how how you being there, how you have come to kind of see that legacy, and what maybe we're missing, or what it is like now, or when you were there, and how that kind of evolution has taken place. Do you have thoughts on any of that? Does that even make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, no, it makes sense. I mean, I think it's definitely it's definitely a different thing than what we learned in school, and, it's kind of amazing, I think, that, like, current at least the students I work with don't think much about the Bauhaus, and
Right,
that's
right.
also, like I'm like, "Wow, okay."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that something that I don't think until years after I was there, I sort of realized really what was going on that, like, does not get looked at in, um, design education in the States, and I think that something that I think was really inspiring is this idea of sort of like a holistic approach,
Right, yeah.
that that explores sort of any tools, materials, and means possible. And so it's not necessarily like circle, square, triangle, but really, I mean, I think that the Bauhaus like study circle with those concentric
Oh,
circles
yeah,
that talk
yeah.
about like materials and approaches, architecture, design, textiles, like that feels so much more interdisciplinary than the way it gets talked about.
Right, right.
Um, and so I think even when I was there, I didn't see that and feel that, but I do think, um, something that I felt when I was there was that truly how like a space is built and the framework that your body walks in can have like an
Mm,
extreme connection to you or disconnection. And for me it felt really exciting to be in buildings that felt intentional, um,
mm,
as opposed to maybe other spaces. Like, I'm not an architect, but I like thinking about architecture, um, or frameworks. And so that was something that I think, and maybe that's why I got teary eyed when I was there, is that like, you see these photos, but then you go and you're like, oh, whoa, this was like this was a total thought experiment.
right, right.
Um, and it's one thought experiment in a world of many other interesting thought experiments, but the way it's taught in design education is that it's the thought experiment,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, so I don't know if that gets to what you
Yeah,
were
yeah, no,
yeah.
yeah, that's so I think you're exactly right, and I'm gonna make a jump that is maybe a big jump, but I wanna use that to talk about Cranbrook because I think
Yeah.
and I know I'm purposely not trying to just go through your whole history. You came back, you worked for a while, but then you went back to school and you went to
Mhm.
Cranbrook for your MFA.
Yeah.
And I think of this is not an original thought, but Cranbrook is sort of a very clear um, sort of cousin maybe to the Bauhaus. I think
Yes.
a lot of those ideals are in Cranbrook, and it was interesting to hear you talk about the Bauhaus building, because that's something I've talked to Elliot about just the
Mhm.
layout and the buildings on Cranbrook and how that has influenced him and teaching. And Cranbrook is notorious for being student led and not checking off boxes. Exactly what you were talking about. Can you talk about sort of going to Cranbrook and the decision to go to Cranbrook as opposed to other schools, and how maybe that Bauhaus experience shaped some of that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when I started talking about the architecture in Dessau, I was immediately, like, making the the
Mhm,
mental leap for
mhm.
myself to Cranbrook. Um, yeah, when I was studying in Germany, I thought I was going to apply to Cranbrook at 21.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
but I was going to apply to the 3D program because I thought I
Mm,
just studied graphic design. I should think about design in a different way.
mm.
And I looked at the application and realized that I had no business applying for graduate school. Like, I had no idea how to make a statement about personal intent. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what I'm doing. And so I tabled that idea. But Cranbrook was on my radar because my professor Heinz Klinken at RIT showed me the red book that
Mm.
Cataline Middenkoop and Ryan Pescatori Frisk had designed when they were there. Talk about an object that you get in the mail and you covet. Like, I had never seen graphic design look like that. I think this had to have been 2002, 2003. They studied with the Maculas, and I was like, "Holy shit, like, I need to be there." I don't know when I can go, but, like, I would love to be there. I looked at the application, realized it was not something I could do. So, um, I went to New York and I worked for a while, mostly in the entertainment industry at MTV and then
Mhm.
Nickelodeon. Did, like, TRL news and MTV news
Nice.
stuff. Yeah, and then,
Yeah.
did Nickelodeon stuff. Um, and I was being really inspired by what I was doing at work, and I would go home and make more work that wasn't for my job, that was sort of inspired by the entertainment industry, or thinking about how design was the infrastructure through which so many things, like, feed through. Um, and so I was starting to meet a lot of Cranbrook grads who were slightly older than me that had graduated around '04, '05,
Mhm,
'06.
mhm.
And looking up to them, being really inspired by them. And so around 2000, yeah, it was 2008, I decided I was going to apply. And so yeah, I applied. I was only going to apply to Cranbrook. Um, a friend, recommended maybe I apply to a couple other schools just in case. I got into
So this was
another
like
design school. Yeah.
okay, so sorry to cut you off, but
No.
so this was not like I want to go to grad school, or I feel like
No.
I need to go to grad school. This was I want to go to Cranbrook. There's something from Cranbrook that I need. It was
Yeah,
very focused there.
and got into um I got into a school that was much more impressive to my parents, who, like, didn't go to school, and they had no idea what Cranbrook was. And I remember I went to the interview at Cranbrook, saw the campus, and I remember calling my mom and saying, "If I don't go get in here, I don't think I want to go to grad school." And
Mm.
my mom saying, "Well, why don't you still go to XYZ schools interview, just because it's XYZ." And so I did, and it wasn't the same experience. It didn't leave me inspired, or it didn't feel
Mhm.
aspirational at all.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I got in, and it was really hard to move to Michigan. Like, I think that was really hard for me to leave my community in New York,
Yeah.
and I think if
Yeah.
I would have gone to the other school, I would have still been in proximity,
Mhm.
but it was the right choice for me. I really wanted to go there, thought if I didn't get in, maybe I would just wait and reapply, and keep working, but I ended up going in. I started in 2009.
It's interesting that you had this sort of the way I asked you about how aware were you of the Bauhaus mythos when you went there, you had the whole Cranbrook mythos when you went there also.
I did, and when I got there, I think Elliot in my interview was like, "Let me cut to the chase because you already know what's going on here," and I think that was also really good, and when current students or friends say they wanna go to Cranbrook, I'm like, "Let me tell you everything challenging about it and also really great because I think you need to know that before you apply."
Yeah, yeah,
Um, just because the non-structure structure is not for everyone.
right.
But I was like, I went through this really structured curriculum in undergrad, so I feel like I don't want that experience for graduate school.
How did you deal with that? It sounds like you had a little bit of that at the Bauhaus, but you were coming from New York where you were working in entertainment, and it was like it sounds a little bit more of a kind of traditional design
Mhm.
roles. What was that sort of transition like? Were you able to kind of develop a studio practice and kind of generate work quickly, or can you talk a little bit about that struggle?
Yeah, it was I think there were a lot of struggles, struggles of did I make the right choice? Because I think
Mm,
that when I talk about this a lot in grad school or with applicants, like any choice you make, you're going to second guess yourself that first
mhm,
year in grad school.
mhm,
You're like, "Oh my god, but that this name of school or whatever, like, was that the right choice?" So I think the first struggles were just being in a place where, like, honestly, there were no queer people.
mm,
That was really hard for me, like, coming from New York and then
right.
getting to Cranbrook where at the time, I think maybe there were, like, 2 gay guys that I was friends with, and we used to joke and call ourselves the Gay Alliance. Like, that was a struggle. I think now in 2022, that's not the case there, but at in 2009 it was, and so there were struggles of, like,
Mm,
did is my community here? And jelly, just, like, getting acclimated to a place that you're not from.
right.
Um, and I don't think making work was difficult there. Like, I applied with only self-initiated work. I didn't apply with any job work. That was kind of a choice. I decided to only share the work that I was making, like, on my own time at night. I think I made, like, a whole portfolio in 6 months before I applied. I remember telling my friends, "I'm applying to grad school. You might not see me for 6 months because I'm gonna just go from work to home."
Yeah,
And, it was when you were, like, renting DVDs from Netflix, and I would just, like, got 3 a week, and I'd, like, watch all these DVDs
nice.
and make stuff. Um, so that wasn't hard. I think I was super intimidated to be there, and I've said this to other, like, former students who've gone on to Cranbrook that, like, the ghosts are very present at that school. I think
Mm,
that especially for those who apply, knowing other Cranbrookers or
mm,
sort of
mhm,
just people who've been at that school, I think that, uh, yeah, that was really intimidating for me to be at this space in this place where I'd seen so much amazing work happen,
mhm.
and wonder if I was going to be able to, like, live up to that and, yeah, I think it was really great. I lived on campus, so I would wake up at 6 a.m., go for a run, get in the studio by 7:30, and I just we most of us lived in our studios, so we were just doing our thing, then having crits on Thursdays, and, it was a profound experience for me. I think that the writing at Cranbrook was the best thing that came out of there for me, the writing and the talking.
Hmm.
I don't think anyone needs to see the work I made while I was there, but I think that the writing and the talking was was really important.
I want to come back to that for a second, but I have two other kind of smaller questions, and then I promise we'll move on from Cranbrook to
Cool.
bigger questions. Um, but you said something interesting about the ghosts at Cranbrook being very real, and that's something that I think about a lot with these sort of big institutions that become
Mhm.
sort of brand names and have their star students, and they become known for a style even.
Mhm.
Um, for better and for worse, and not always by their own fault. Sometimes it's just how it's kind of like it's the Bauhaus idea. It just sort of devolves into something. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, and you can talk about this in the context of Cranbrook, you can talk about this in the
Mhm.
context of the Bauhaus, you could even talk about this in the context of your own institution now and teaching.
Mhm.
How do you sort of reconcile being in the presence of those ghosts while also realizing that you need to move beyond them? And I'm not talking about the student, I'm talking about like at an institutional level.
Yeah.
Like how does an institution like Cranbrook still be Cranbrook while also not making everybody else who goes through that program feel like they're at Cranbrook? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the issue with that is how people write about Cranbrook. I
Right,
think
right.
that most people stay writing about it through the lens of the McCoys and the Macalas, and even, maybe up until the early 2000s. And I think that there has been there have been so many people that have gone through that school in just like the last 15 years that I don't even think, like, people don't talk about them as like Cranbrook. And I feel like sometimes I read things about Cranbrook and I'm like, no, start talking about things that are happening there now, because I think that that sort of the myth of Cranbrook is important, but I do think that people would be surprised past the 90s what's been happening.
Right,
And
right.
I think that with any school there's like this sort of fanboy situation that happens. And so people will visit and may be disappointed that it's like not the way it was or how they've read
Mhm.
it to be.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that can happen with like a lot of other sort of like private schools.
Mhm.
I will say, the school that I teach at it's a top ranked school, but it is a public school, and so I think that we kind of are a little off the hook when it
Yeah.
comes to that, for better or worse. I think explaining what we do is maybe sometimes surprising because we don't have that sort of that name that people are like, ooh, you went to XYZ. Like this
Right.
means that you are like a hot shot. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
like I think that when I talk to people about choosing a graduate school to go to, there's like so many different reasons why you choose a place, but it's usually like faculty, funding, and facilities. But
Mhm.
really, it's also like whatever school you go to, that becomes part of your family tree for better or worse. And
Mhm.
so I think you should look and like, are those the people you want to run with in some way? Do you think that these are people you can lean on? Uh, and something that I think has been really sort of like the gift that keeps on giving with Cranbrook is that I do think that Cranbrook grads really, like, it doesn't matter like where you live, what year you went there. I do feel like sometimes I can cold email someone who maybe is like 30 years older than me or 15 years younger than me, and we can have a really funny conversation about that weird experience that we all went through, like being
Right.
on that campus,
Yeah.
even though those experiences were drastically different.
The thing that is always interesting to me about Cranbrook that I don't think is discussed enough is how all the artists in residence there have kind of seem to put such an emphasis on education and pedagogy, and it seems like
Mhm.
there are this is purely anecdotal, but I have never taught at an institution that does not have a Cranbrook person on its faculty,
Yeah.
and there is
Mhm.
no other institution where every place that I've gone has had somebody from that institution. Cranbrook is the only
Yeah.
one, and that's a half dozen institutions,
Mhm.
and you all are everywhere in every
Yes.
every kind
For
of
such a
design
small
education
school.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on why that is. Like, how did you get into teaching? What is in the air there that kind of, encourages that sort of direction?
I knew I wanted to teach when I was in undergrad, but I
Mm.
didn't know what I wanted to do, and then Graham, my 3D teacher, was like, "Get an MFA, don't get it if you wanna teach at the university level, get an MFA," because I was thinking about, like, sticking around for maybe an art education master's there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, and when I went to Cranbrook, I did not think I would teach anytime soon after
Mm.
graduation. I thought 20, 30 years from Cranbrook. Um, I think that the interdisciplinary approach there, whether you're in ceramics, photo, sculpture, fiber, 2D or 3D, I think that that school doesn't privilege like the quote unquote fine arts over the quote unquote crafts or design. I think that there really is this supportive discourse on sort of like if you can talk about form and content, then you should be able to talk about form and content regardless of where it's coming from. And I think that, I've taught it at institutions where like people in other disciplines are like, I'm a painter, I can't talk about graphic design. And I think something that was really amazing about Cranbrook is that that does not happen. Someone from the metals department could talk more than your classmates in your 2D crit, and you could go to fiber and do the same. And I think that that really sort of provides a space for like mental gymnastics to happen, and like you're sort of provided with new language to not just talk about your own discipline, but then to bring that language from your discipline to others. And so I think there's this really interesting cross pollination of language that happens, which is why I think a lot of people end up teaching, because they're able to talk to people about their work. Um, and sometimes that's like really difficult to find in
Yeah.
an institution. So I think that that is maybe what Cranbrook really prepped me for. Um, and I think, in the in my group, I would say like I think there were 11 people ahead of me and 9 in my class. Like not a lot of us are teaching. I think that there's a lot of Cranbrook people teaching, but I would say like of the cohorts, you'll find like 1 or 2 in each cohort that go on to
Mm,
teach.
mhm,
I don't
mhm.
think it's like the other school that I had gotten into in grad when I went to an open house, they were like, if you want to teach, don't say that in your statement. And that really turned me off because I thought, well, like, if you're choosing to go into another level of education, like, shouldn't you also like respect that education and like want to
Right.
be generous and like pass that on? And I think that the people that taught me, I'm trying to, like, pass on the things that they gave me to other people, and so I just feel like I have,
Mm.
like, a deep there should be in educational spaces a deep respect for educators and, like, education inside and outside of the institution, like, that doesn't have to be, like, going on to teach in college, it could be running workshops or, you
Right.
know, doing whatever.
I first became aware of your work a couple years ago when you were doing a lot of kind of writing and thinking about this idea of queering design education. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that and some of the ideas behind that. But for people who have not read your writing or are unfamiliar, can you talk about when you talk about queering design education, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it came out of, asking myself that question that, I ended up using for the Walker Art Center's,
Mhm,
soundboard
mhm,
platform. I don't think it's okay, so querying design isn't one thing for me, and I think that a lot of people would have different definitions, but I think that maybe 5, 6 years into teaching, I realized that some of the ways in which I was trying to change or shake up what was happening in the classroom could be defined as, like, querying design. And so
Mm.
some of those things are, and these aren't like, this isn't rocket science, but it's like, instead of solving problems, ask more questions. Like, how do we operate on the margins? How do we interrogate the margins? How do we acknowledge and privilege the bodies that are in a classroom, that are in our
Mm.
space, and how do we react to each other? How do we talk about community and not audience?
Mm.
I think those are some of the things that I saw happening in the prompts or classes I was teaching, and I was like, "Oh, I think I could define this for myself in these ways." Which then, like, I think allowed me to think more deeply about my teaching in general by kind of looking at it through that lens.
In thinking through this, I'm curious how that has changed how you operate in the classroom, and what changes you've made in how you act as a teacher as you
Mhm.
started to kind of really think deeply about these ideas.
Um, I think that when I started teaching, uh, after grad school, so I ended up getting a visiting artist position at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and I taught with incredible people there: Eric Brandt, Kendra
Mm.
Murphy, Jan Jancourt, and Piotr
Mhm.
Shahalsky. Um, and I think that, like, I realized what I wanted to do in the classroom was, like, indirect response to how I had been taught. And so I thought about the things that brought me joy, the things that I didn't learn about that I felt really sort of, like, upset that, like, certain histories or spaces
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
communities were sort of left out of the conversation. And then, I thought about, like, what didn't bring me joy. And those were sort of like the simple questions that I asked myself when I started teaching. Um, and I considered every time I walked into a classroom like a thought experiment, or like an experiment that could be changed over time. And so uh that's ideally how, like, I try to think about teaching and trying to be responsive to the people who are in the room.
Mhm.
Um Thinking about a syllabus as a living document, thinking about a
Mhm.
syllabus as a collaborative document. Um and so yeah, those are some of the ways in which I guess I started trying to do this in the classroom before, calling it querying design pedagogy.
I love all of these ideas, and I think, in many ways, these are things that I had been thinking about, much like
Mhm,
you, as a response to my own undergraduate education, and even my graduate
mhm.
education, honestly, a little bit.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, um, and something that I think about a lot. You've done a very good job of talking about other institutions without ever naming them, and I'm going to try to do that now too. Um, I have been in situations either as a part-time faculty member or as a visitor, or in different situations where this type of language is talked about a lot.
Mhm,
Talking about community, talking about amplifying different voices, talking about
mhm,
decolonizing, but then
mhm,
when push comes to shove, it sort of falls back on the way things have always been done, and that's because a variety
mhm,
of reasons. It's easier. Everyone can agree on it. Mostly everyone can agree on it. Uh, you can put on your website that, X number of students got jobs. And so if, if
Mhm.
it's all about, making sure that students get jobs, some of this experimental work gets kind of pushed to the side, or some of these new ideas get kind of, lesser voices. And I'm curious about your experience there and your thoughts there. Um, when you are interested in these things and value these things, how they don't just
Mhm.
become platitudes, but can actually sort of
Mhm.
shift departments and institutions.
Yeah. Okay. Man, I feel like we could like
I
talk
know. I'm
about this
sorry
for
I
a
asked you
long
this
time.
at the
No,
end.
no, no. No, no, no. It's fine. Well, I think that the important thing is that these ideas become actionable. And
Hmm.
so I think it's really important, no matter what discipline you're in, to explain how this can be, how these thoughts can be applied to practice, right? And I
Hmm.
think that uh, that is something that's really important. I went to a lecture maybe 5 or 6 years ago in the sculpture department where I teach, and I remember it was an activist from New York who was speaking, and a student raised their hand and said, "I really, value everything you're talking about, like these Marxist ideas and Judith Butler, blah blah
Hmm.
blah. But like, I want to know why it's important to be reading this when there's actually things that need to happen in the world."
Hmm.
And this activist said, I think that's a really good question. And she really started talking about like, these people, like there are people that have lived their lives thinking really deeply about things. And can't we have to see the beauty in that, because I think that in education in general, in the arts and the humanities, like that is not, those types of educations are dwindling, right? Like we're seeing
Hmm.
schools get
Hmm.
rid of them, and like how beautiful is it to support deep thought, but
Hmm.
also how can we apply this deep thought to our lives? And I do think like in the classroom, like specifically graphic design, there's this connection to communication. It is communication, it is language, it is practice. So how do you not only like have these big lofty ideas, as someone said a few weeks ago, but like how do you make it tangible? And I think that that's always like the deep question, and I think also a deep reward to have both. I don't think it's like either or, and I think that that's where a lot of design education fails, is that they choose one over the other, and I believe that they should be happening hand in hand.
I think that's exactly right. That was such a great articulation of that. Um, I have two more questions. What are you thinking about now? What are you working on? Tell me like where your headspace is, how you're kind of taking some of these ideas and moving them forward. What's interesting to you right now?
Yeah, well, I'm working on this project with a product designer named Sam Taylor. I had originally, like 4 years ago, I wanted to turn my office into a library and performance space. And like my
Mm.
office is the size of a walk in closet, so it's not big. And I thought that it would be this place where it was like a library, but like there'd be things happening. And because the space is small, you'd either witness it from the hallway or through some sort of like live streaming. And then when I was actually gonna start making it happening, the pandemic began, and then last winter, my office grew black mold.
Oh
Um,
no. Oh no.
so it wasn't gonna happen that way. And so Sam and I were talking in like January 2020, and he was really interested in this project. And so now it's a collaborative project. It's called Dream Space, and it's sort of inspired by, if you go to a library and you can sign out a room for an
Yeah.
event or do something in, just read. Dream Space is a space on the net, but it's not net art. And it's a place where like artists, writers, designers will be able to sort of sign out spaces for events, performances. There will be a library, there will be a listening room, and yeah. So dream space is a framework for other things to happen. And there will be sort of IRL pop-up spaces that happen, hopefully like at some residencies or other like smaller institutions. So that is a project that I feel like Sam and I started making it a thing January 2021. And I think we just went through another round of design this week. Uh, so that's something I'm really excited about. And then my publishing initiative, Nico Fontana, which is sort of like centered around the querying of language, working with like
Mhm.
designers and artists who write. So I'm working on a book with Shawnee Michael and Holloway, who's a friend of mine. I'm going to be
Mm.
working on a book, hopefully with Mel Nguyen as well. So
Oh,
those are
wow.
some things I'm like excited about.
That sounds
Yeah.
great. All of those projects sound amazing. And it connects to my last question, which is the question I use to end all of these. What are you reading right now?
I just started reading the Care Manifesto by the Care Collective.
Mm.
Um, and I also have like in my bag the Mutual Aid book by Dean
Yeah.
Spade. Those are both
Yeah.
like published by the same place. Yeah, those are the two. I just read Slave Play by
Right.
Jeremy O'Harris.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, those are the things I've been reading.
Nicole, this was such a great conversation. I'm glad we finally got to do this. Thank you for being on the show. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
This episode was recorded on March 9th, 2022. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can support the show on Patreon and find previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.